So without further ado, folks, let's get to it then with the NFC East. Let's see who the Kansas City Chiefs will try to repeat against. We start off in the NFC East. Now, this is the division that I feel like it's the most. Obviously, my favorite team is the Philadelphia Eagles, so I feel like I have a very good handle on this division. Outside of the Eagles, I am best betting every single team in this division. The Commanders are taking their over of 6.5. Dallas are taking their under of 10.5. Giants are taking their under of 6.5. The Philadelphia Eagles, I have them 12-5, pulling away pretty easily in the NFC East. Now, my favorite football team did avoid the Super Bowl hangover somewhat last season, at least for the first 11 games. We all know the story, right? They start 10-1, they collapse at the end of the season, they lose badly in 6 of their last 7 games, and they completely collapse. They get blown out in almost every single game they're in, and no one could put their finger on it. Jalen Hurts did not look the same. Sean Desai was replaced by Matt Patricia, Coach Pencil, who seemingly again made the team so much worse. And we're going to stick a pencil ear right in our ear for Coach Pencil. There wasn't a major injury. It was just a case of a football team who had lost its cohesion after winning a lot of close games to start the year so on. And while many thought Nick Sirianni would be blamed for the collapse, not me. I thought that the Eagles, Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman, their brass, I thought they would give Sirianni one more chance after Jason Kelce, Fletcher Cox, so one of the veterans, came out and defended Sirianni. They did make the coordinator changes. Kellen Moore comes from the Chargers to replace Brian Johnson. Vic Fangio, who the Eagles wanted as their 2023 defensive coordinator, comes in and replaces Desai/Patricia. So Coach Pencil is gone, and all the reports are indicating that both coordinators have autonomy over their side of the ball. And training camp has been a positive sign for the team. Jalen Hurts has only threw one interception all camp, and that was on the last day of camp to Darius Slay. And the Eagles organization also did something they usually do not do. They paid a running back, former New York Giant, Penn Stater Saquon Barkley, comes in and replaces DeAndre Swift. Now, speaking of Jason Kelce, speaking of Fletcher Cox, both those players have retired. And young guys such as Cam Urges on the offense side of the ball at center, who played right guard for the team last year, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Milt Williams, Bryce Huff on the defense side of the ball are going to need to step up. Internally, there's a belief that they can, and there's a thought that Bryce Huff could bring the production that Hassan Reddick had brought the Philadelphia Eagles the past 2 seasons at a cheaper price. Also on defense, the secondary has been completely redone. The team drafted Quentin Williams out of Toledo, Cooper DeJean out of Iowa with their first 2 picks. They bring back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. James Bradbury transitions to safety. Avante Maddox is brought back in the SWAT. So there's a lot of questions on the 2024 Eagles. Will Nick Sirianni and co start off slow? Is Nick Sirianni's seat so warm that he could be fired if they lose week 1 in Brazil to the Green Bay Packers? And I think the Eagles are once again being a little bit under the radar. There's talks in the NFC about the Niners, about the Rams, about the Lions, about Green Bay, about even Chicago, Atlanta. I don't feel like a lot of people are talking about the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think the Eagles, being from the city of brotherly love the underdog story. And I think that they want to show the league this year they should not be forgotten in the Super Bowl conversation. Now, this may be a big shock to you, but I have the number 2 team in the NFC East, not the Dallas Cowboys, but the Washington Commanders at 9-8. And again, a new owner, a new head coach, a new rookie quarterback gives Commanders fans hope that this is the year, as well as my good buddy Austin Arnold, that this is the beginning of a rebirth for the franchise. They are led by number 2 overall pick in the draft, Jaden Daniels out of LSU. And in my opinion, they have the ingredients to be what the Houston Texans were a year ago. They have the same formula. A rookie quarterback drafted number 2 overall with a ton of potential. Obviously, CJ Stroud, Jane Daniels. An experienced offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick in Houston, Cliff Kingsbury in Washington, with a defensive-minded head coach from a similar scheme, by the way, D'Amico Ryans going from in Houston, Dan Quinn now in Washington. They have a solid infrastructure in place. Obviously, Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler, the defensive line, even though they no longer have Montez Sweat and Chase Young, they do have Durant Payne, they do have Jonathan Allen still, and it is in a relatively weak division, in my opinion. Now, again, I'm not predicting them to win the division over Philly. I think Washington could make the postseason potentially. It's going to come down to tiebreakers, I think. But a 9-win season and a second place finish in the NFC East ahead of Dan Quinn's former team and the Cowboys, I think is not only plausible, but I think it's realistic to assume. Again, Daniel's playmaking ability combined with Cliff Kingsbury's play calling is going to open up the offense for the likes of Terry McLaurin and Austin Eckler. Now, let's go to the Dallas Cowboys, who I also have finishing 9-8, but because of their struggles in the division with Washington and Philly, I do think that they will be finishing third in the division. Now, the Cowboys this year, they spent a grand total of $5 million in the offseason. They spent their hard-earned dough on Eric Kendricks, who is going to help Mike Zimmer, their new defensive coordinator, implement the scheme, and Ezekiel Elliott, who after losing Tony Pollard, and he looked worn down in New England last year, will once again be the starting quarterback of the Dallas freaking Cowboys. Now, Jerry Jones is penny pinching because Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, we all know they're all due for massive contract extensions at the end of the season. And not only did they not spend any money, but they lost their veteran offensive lineman. Tyler Biadasz at center is now in Washington with Dan Quinn. You have Tyron Smith, as I already mentioned, now with the Jets at left tackle. Tony Pollard, as I said, is now in Tennessee. And to me, Jerry is doing all of this to sabotage Dak. Jerry said he went all in this offseason to win his first Lombardi trophy since before I was born. But does $5 million look all in to you? In my opinion, this season may be a lame duck year for not only Dak Prescott, for not only Mike McCarthy, who Green Bay Packers head coach Matt LaFleur ran circles around the wild card game in January. I personally think this Dallas Cowboys team is they're not as good as the team that won 12 games each of the last 3 seasons. And God forbid if something does happen to CeeDee Lamb, because I don't know how this team would move the football. It's been a weird offseason in Big D. And I think weird does not feel like winning. The NFC East has not had a repeat champion since the 2004 Philadelphia Eagles. In my opinion, all streaks are meant to be broken, but this one won't live until at least 2025. And it would not shock me in the least bit. If Dallas gets off to a 2-5 start, they have a very hard schedule to start their season. They have at Cleveland versus Baltimore in week 3, at Pittsburgh in week 5, versus Detroit in week 6, at San Francisco in week 7, at Atlanta in week 8, versus Philly in week 10, versus Houston in week 11, at Washington in week 12. In my opinion, going into week 13 against the Giants, only the Giants again in week 4 and the Saints in week 2 are the only games right there on that schedule that you can easily pencil in wins for. So with that being said, I think the Cowboys, they may get out at the end of the year with a new interim head coach, but it would not surprise me if Mike McCarthy is the first head coach fired. Now the New York Giants. I think they go 2-15. I think they are tied with the New England Patriots for the worst record in the NFL. To me, they're incompetent. Period. End of story. They let go of their only real weapon on offense and Saquon Barkley to their arch rival in Philly. They can't move off Daniel Jones, even though they need to. And I like Malik Neighbors, but I don't think he's saving the franchise. Brian Dable is a smart offensive mind, but in my opinion, overachieving in 2022 was the worst thing to happen to this team because now they're trapped, and it feels like Dable, general manager Joe Shane, and the entire staff will be replaced next year. Their over-under win total is 6.5. If they get to 7 wins, I will be flabbergasted. Now let's get to the NFC West. So I'm not best betting anybody in this division, but I'll tell you, this is the one division where I have the over on every single team in the division. Niners over 11.5. The Rams over 8.5. Arizona and Seattle both over 7.5. We're going to start with the Super Bowl runner-up San Francisco 49ers, who, in my opinion, there will be no Super Bowl hangover this year. Even with the Brandon Ayuk drama, we know it's one thing for the Niners. It's Super Bowl or bust. Because in 1 year, they're going to end up paying Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant in the 2022 NFL Draft, approximately $50 more million, folks, than his current salary of $1.1 million. The Niners, they made the NFC Championship game during each of the past 4 seasons. They made it to the Super Bowl twice. They've lost to Patrick Mahomes on both occasions. Now, we know the division is better. The Rams surprised the world last season, arguably, by essentially doing a 1-year rebuild. I think that Arizona is going to be better and on the rise with Kyler Murray and Jonathan Gannon. And Seattle has a good roster, and they have a new head coach in Mike McDonald. I really don't know what to expect. But the Niners have maybe the best roster in the NFL. Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, Devon Argrave, Tagovailoa Ufanga. The team literally has a Pro Bowler at every single level on both sides of the ball. I think their regular season will go about the same as it has been. They'll take care of their division. They're going to win a lot of games. Their only goal this year, which is why I think right now they're reluctant to trade Brandon Ayuk, is to break through when it counts. Now we go to the Rams, who last year I was wrong on the Rams. I said their defense was a bunch of no names besides Aaron Donald. And while I was right on that, their defensive coordinator Raheem Morris turned around that defense. And who would have thought 5th-round draft choice Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams would come out of nowhere? And like I said, the Rams would do a 1-year rebuild, and they were a play or two away from knocking off the Detroit Lions in the wild card round. And, I'm not making the same mistake this year with the Rams. So as long as Stafford, Kupp, and Puka Nacua are healthy, Sean McVay's calling the plays, I think they're going to be tough to defeat in the NFC. I just don't think they can get by Kyle Shanahan, at least in the regular season. As we've seen, McVay has struggled against the Niners during his career. I think they're going to win games. Again, a little bit of a weaker conference than in the AFC. They should be a playoff team. And now we get to the Arizona Cardinals, who, if you remember a year ago, and by the way, as I said, I had them going 9-8. And, before Kyler Murray came back from his torn ACL, they were in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. And I had talked about it. I thought Arizona was willing to move off Kyler Murray. We know the whole situation with the studying clause in his contract and the relationship with ownership. And they added a new general manager and they added a new head coach in Jonathan Gannon. And to me, Arizona could have said, you know what, Kyler, we played Clayton Tune one game against Cleveland. We're competing hard against the Giants, and we're competing hard against Washington, and we beat Dallas early in the season. And you know what, Kyler, we're gonna take either Caleb Williams, Jane Daniels, Drake May, whoever they would like at quarterback. We're gonna trade you. We're gonna get more pieces, and we're gonna build for the future. They did not do that. Arizona, to me, did have a plan: compete, collect draft picks, see how Murray plays when he returns, and then build for 2024. And they stayed with Kyler. They still got the number 4 pick in the NFL draft, and they used it on Marvin Harrison Jr., who I think is the best wide receiver to come into the NFL since Jamar Chase, since Justin Jefferson, since Odell Beckham. By the way, all of those guys, LSU receivers. I think Marvin Harrison out of Ohio State is already going to be a top 7-ish wide receiver in the league. I think he could change life for Arizona the way DeAndre Hopkins did for Kyler Murray in 2020. Arizona made 11 draft picks. They're tied with the Packers and Rams for the most draft picks in the NFL. Again, expectations are low for them, but I think the way Gannon's got that team playing, the way Kyler Murray played at the end of last season, I think that they are on the way up. And I've made this same mistake with the Cliff Kingsbury led Arizona in the past. I'm buying the Cardinals order this year. I'm not saying playoffs, and again, I could be wrong. They could go from 9 wins to 6 or 7, but they're over under to me is 7.5 for a reason. While they're going to compete, it wouldn't shock me if they're in the wild card mix late December, early January. And a lot like the Browns, Seattle, I just don't know what to expect, right? Because the Pete Carroll era is over. Defensive coordinator Mike McDonald, the former DC at Baltimore, is now their head coach. They've gone from the oldest head coach in the NFL to the youngest. They got incredible weapons, right? DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Kenneth Walker, 2 young tackles, Charles Cross at left, Abraham Lucas and right. But outside of their young corners and Tariq Woolen and Devin Witherspoon, to me, their defensive line leaves a lot to be desired. They got both their starting safeties this year in Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. And while McDonald rebuilt Baltimore's secondary in 2023, it remains to be seen if he can do the same with Seattle. And what, in my opinion, is going to be a very hard division to cover with Arizona, the Rams, and San Francisco. So I want to like Seattle, but Geno Smith had a regression last year, and Shane Waldron, their OC, is no longer there. Their OC is now the former OC in Washington, which is why I think Seattle planned to take Michael Penix if Atlanta did not take him so early. And Geno Smith and Sam Howell are their signal callers. They have the worst quarterback situation in the division, and as the theme has been in today's NFL predictions, the best quarterback in the division should win the division most of the case. I actually think this division is the exception, only because San Francisco's roster is so good. And I think the worst quarterback in the division will more than likely be the 4th place team in the division. I'm not taking Geno over Kyler, Matthew Stafford, or Brock Purdy right now. In the NFC North, I'm taking the over on the Lions at 10.5. I'm taking the over on the Bears at 8.5, though I really want to best bet that, though I'm not. I'm taking Green Bay's under at 9.5, and I'm taking Minnesota's under at 7.5. Let's get into Motor City. Detroit, MCDC, Motor City, Dan Campbell, because in 2023, for the first time in 30 years, the Lions, not only did they win a division title, they won 2 playoff games. And you can make an argument if it wasn't for a ball off the face mask of Brandon Ayuk, Dan Campbell and the Motor City Detroit Lions might have been making reservations for Las Vegas for the Super Bowl. The Lions winning 12 games, in my opinion, was not the biggest surprise in the world because they had the best offensive line now in football over Philadelphia. They're a little bit younger. We already talked about Ben Johnson and what I would have paid to get him in New England. And I think that's pivotal that their 2 coordinators, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn on the defense side, interviewed for head coaching gigs. They both come back. And we've seen Jared Goff with those weapons, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams, Gibbs the running back, David Montgomery. When he's in a dome or warm weather, Jared Goff can play like a top 5 NFL quarterback at any given time. And Glenn turned around that defense. Obviously, Aiden Hutchinson, the number 2 overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft out of Michigan, was incredible last year on the defensive line. and they have revamped their secondary because that was the Lions' biggest issue last year. They bring in Aaron Arnold out of Alabama. They bring in Ennis Rakestraw Jr. out of Missouri with their first two picks in the draft to redo that corner room. And we know Dan Campbell and the Detroit Lions are going to want to bite kneecaps, and we know that they want another chance at the Super Bowl. Again, their schedule is harder than a year ago. And there's a lot of people in Detroit who feel like the Lions are going to have a bad year because they're so disappointed in the Lions because what they always do, they never follow up. But to me, Detroit this year feels like America's team more than the Cowboys. Everybody is rooting for the Detroit Lions to go make the Super Bowl for the first time in franchise history. This team was this close to making it last year, and I think that the Lions are going to be really good again, even if the division is better. Because speaking of the division, folks, the Chicago Bears. Oh boy, do I love to talk about the Chicago Bears because I may have never seen a team potentially improve so much on one side of the ball than the Bears might have on the offense side of the ball this year, and they won 7 games last year. They traded for Keenan Allen. They drafted Roma Dunze in the draft instead of going for another defensive player, and that is after they selected Caleb Williams, who has looked as big as advertised, not only on Hard Knocks, but in preseason. And they go along with DJ Moore, Cole Kmet. They bring in DeAndre Swift from the Philadelphia Eagles. This offense, to me, is loaded. And ever since they traded for Montez Sweat at the trade deadline last year in week 8, the Bears were a top 10 defense down the stretch. And we'd seen on our Knocks, Jalen Johnson is motivated because he wasn't voted as one of the top 100 players. And he certainly does feel like, and I do believe, he is a top 10 corner in the sport. So there's a lot of pressure on this Bears team, and I think they're embracing the pressure. And Matt Eberflus is my only question mark about this team. I don't know about him as a head coach, but I do know one thing. His side of the ball, which is defense. And again, you guys know I'm not in love with defensive coaches, but it can work. We've seen it in Houston. We've seen it in Buffalo. If you have a great offensive coordinator, and I don't know how great Shane Waldron is, but I think he's a very competent defensive coordinator. And I do think Caleb Williams is going to be a star day one in this league. And we know Waldron was responsible for resurrecting the career of Geno Smith in Seattle. I think we've never seen a number 1 overall pick with this talent and our situation around him that's better than what Caleb Williams has had in Chicago. Now, I'm not picking them to win the Super Bowl, like some are, like Fox Sports 1 analyst for First Things First, Nick Wright. But I think that there is expectations in Chicago. This should be a 9 to 10 win team and a playoff team. This is not an ordinary number 1 pick situation. And if the Bears do fall flat on their face, Matt Eberflus will not stay along long. It's the only thing keeping me back from the Bears potentially making an even bigger run this season is if Matt Eberflus falls flat on his face and he could be the first coach fired. Let's get to the Green Bay Packers, who you guys know how I feel about the Packers. Jordan Love. I'm not in love with him because listen, his first 8 games last year, and again, this was sitting behind Aaron Rodgers for 3 seasons. He had 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. At Halloween, Matt LaFleur basically said the guy could not play. Green Bay had a 3-5 record. Yet, the rest of the season, Jordan Love took the Packers to a 6-3 record to get them to 9-8, the number 7 seed in the NFC playoffs, a win in Jerry's world over the Cowboys in dominating fashion, and a near upset over the Niners in the divisional round, which is why everybody is in love with Jordan Love because he finished the season with a 20-2 touchdown interception ratio during that streak. But I'm sorry, I refuse to believe that a guy who had a great 8-game stretch towards the end of the year deserved a 4-year, $220 million extension. Say that out loud, folks. In 3 months, Does somebody go from an average quarterback to a top 5 quarterback in the sport? Is that sustainable? I don't think so. But again, if Jordan Love is even good next year, answer me this. Do the Packers have the best insert a position in their own division? Quarterback, I would take Jared Goff and Caleb Williams over Jordan Love. Running back, I would take Jahmyr Gibbs, Aaron Jones, and DeAndre Swift over Josh Jacobs. Weapons, receivers and tight ends. I would take Minnesota's loaded weapons, Chicago's, and Detroit's over Green Bay's. I don't love Watson. I don't love Dobbs. I think Jaron Reed's okay. Their tight ends are decent, but again, they're not better than what Minnesota, Chicago, or Detroit has. Now, offensive line, I think it's very good, but I don't think it's better than Detroit's. Defensive line, again, I think it's very good. I don't think it's better than Chicago's. Their secondary, if Jair Alexander is back and healthy, is good, but it's not better than Chicago's, in my opinion. So, by every metric, Green Bay does not have the best blank in their own division. And to me, it's really hard to win a division that way. Listen, I don't dislike the Packers. I have people that I've seen comment on my stuff saying that I'm a Green Bay Packer hater and that I'm a Bears fan. I'm not. I think Green Bay is a playoff contender, but I just do not think a lot of that last year can be sustainable. I think a lot of it was luck. And I don't think their roster is better than Detroit. I don't think it's better than Chicago's. And if Minnesota had a better defense and a better quarterback, I like their pieces better than Green Bay. And I think losing Aaron Jones to Minnesota will be a big downgrade. I don't think Josh Jacobs is a great running back. I think he had one good year in Oakland/Vegas. And I think it's also going to take time to implement the new scheme that Jeff Afley, the former head coach of Boston College, is going to implement on defense as they replace Joe Barry. So I think it's very plausible. Green Bay gets off to a slow start again. And again, I think they finish right there in the wild card hunt, but I don't think they're winning the division like a lot of people do. The Minnesota Vikings. They have the worst quarterback situation in the division, regardless of it would have been J.J. McCarthy if he did not get hurt in the preseason or Sam Darnold. And here's a fun fact. For this year, the NFC North is the only division where all 4 starters, Jared Goff, Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, and Sam Darnold, were first-round picks. However, despite their QB situation and a defense led by the former Dolphin head coach Brian Flores that's not great, they have a tremendous offensive head coach in Kevin O'Connell, who was nicknamed the Tall Sean McVay when he was there with McVay in LA. They have weapons galore. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, not to mention TJ Hockenson, who will be back, after missing part of the season, recovering from his torn ACL a year ago. Now, I'm more down on the Vikings with Darnold for the whole year than I was if they had McCarthy play a majority of the games. But to me, they're over under. Again, I use this stat a lot. It's 7.5. I think that Vegas, again, outside of Denver and a few teams, pretty much knows what they're doing when it comes to these over-unders. I think 7.5 over-under is reasonable. 7 wins is reasonable. If Flores can get the defense, in the middle of the pack, maybe they'll compete for a playoff spot. Maybe they'll get 8-9 wins. And there is a world where Darnold is what Baker Mayfield was last year in Tampa. Who was the guy? Who was a high draft pick, right? Baker number 1, Darnold number 3. They were in the same class, bounced around the league. Baker from Cleveland to Carolina to the Rams to Tampa. Darnold from the Jets to Carolina to San Francisco to Minnesota. Could Sam Darnold find his right spot? He's going to have 10 home games this year. They have 9 home games and then 1 on the road against Detroit. I should say 10 warm weather games. He's going to have 10 games indoors, 9 at home, and then at Detroit. They have the infrastructure to make noise, folks. And I do think the NFC North has overtaken the AFC North as the hardest division in football. especially on the offense side of the football, which, as we know, is the more important side of the football in 2024, regardless of Pop Warner, high school, college, or pro. I just think Darnold's the worst quarterback in the division. They have weapons to win games. They're going to be decent. They should not be overlooked. But I just don't think they're going to be a playoff team this year. And the final division, the NFC South. I have two best bets here. So in the NFC, I'm only best betting the NFC East and the NFC South. I'm best betting Atlanta, whose over under is 9.5, and I'm best betting New Orleans is under, whose over under is 7.5. Let's get to Atlanta, who I think is going to lose their first three games this year. At home against the Steelers in week 1, at Philadelphia week 2, home against the Chiefs week 3. I think they start off 0-3, and then I think everyone's going to sell their stock in Atlanta, and I think that's when you buy the Falcons. Because maybe outside of the Bears, has any team improved more in the NFL than Atlanta? The upgrade of head coach is significant from Arthur Smith to Raheem Morris. The upgrade of quarterback is significant from Desmond Ridder to Kirk Cousins. And by the way, Zach Robinson, who was the former Rams OC, comes over as Atlanta's OC. He runs the same system that Kirk Cousins ran in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell. And so everything seems to be on the rise for Atlanta. However, 6 weeks after the Cousins root their family to Atlanta, Atlanta goes ahead and takes Michael Penix out of Washington. And during the post-draft press conference that night, head coach Raheem Morris stated the team would hopefully never be drafting that high again, and that's why they made the move. And after, again, taking a step back, as I said after the night after the draft, I understood the move by Atlanta. Yes, they did pay Kirk Cousins, but he's coming off a torn Achilles, and we don't know how good he's going to be. Michael Penix is coming off 2 torn ACLs in college, but his last year at Washington, as I mentioned earlier when it came to Tua, he looked like a bigger, stronger Tua with how he got Washington to the national championship game with his pocket passes. Atlanta has a strong offensive line, and now we hope that Zach Robinson will unleash the likes of Bijan Robinson, will unleash the likes of Kyle Pitts, will unleash the likes of Drake London. And Atlanta, during the past week, they've added Justin Simmons in the back end. They've added Matthew Judon up front on the defense side to go along with Calais Campbell and A.J. Terrell and Grady Jarrett on that defense. Again, the Falcons, they won 7 games a year ago with that hack as a coach known as Arthur Smith. Now, Raheem Morris, who has his second opportunity as a head coach after failing at Tampa Bay, he has a chance to prove owner Arthur Blank right that he made the right decision by choosing him instead of we gotta go move on to the Jets. And again, I think as long as Atlanta stays healthy, even if they start the year 1-2, 0-3, the team is going to be good, and they should be the favorites to win the NFC South. Now, let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Because last year, we all said Tampa had the infrastructure, right? They had Mike Evans, they had Chris Godwin, they had Todd Bowles, very good defensive-minded head coach. They had the pieces on defense. We just weren't sure Baker Mayfield was going to be the guy. And we said if they got out to a cold start, maybe they move off from Evans, maybe they move off Godwin, and they sort of tear this thing down and they rebuild post-Tom Brady. And the NFC South is not the best division in the world, even with an improving Atlanta. And Baker Mayfield had a career year. He won the NFC South. He defeated the Eagles in the wild card round, and he played very well in a game Tampa had a chance to win against the Detroit Lions in the divisional round. And almost everybody is back besides Devin White, who left to Philadelphia. And it remains to be seen how much of an impact losing Dave Canales, who is now going to be the head coach in Carolina, will have on Mayfield. But Tampa's roster is still good. I don't think they're better than Atlanta. And I think Atlanta, we beat them twice last year with Desmond Ridder at the quarterback position. I don't think Tampa should be the favorites to win the division this year. But again, a lot like Green Bay, a lot like Chicago, Seattle, Arizona, I think they're sort of in that mix for a playoff spot in the NFC still. I don't think they're going to be awful. The Carolina Panthers. Now, I own it. I owned it by week 2 or 3 last year because I thought Bryce Young and Frank Reich were going to win this division. Yeah, I don't know why you credit me with these NFL predictions because the Panthers were my biggest miss of the season. And not only was Reich fired midway through the season, but Bryce Young looked like a complete bust. They had no weapons break out. I thought Miles Sanders was going to be decent. I thought Chuba Hubbard was going to be decent. I thought Aiden Hurst was going to be very good at the tight end position. And outside of Adam Thielen, they had nobody and their offensive line was a train wreck. And I don't even know if Patrick Mahomes could have made chicken salad out of whatever that was a year ago. And so I'm throwing Bryce Young's rookie year out the window, just like I did with Trevor Lawrence and Urban Meyer in 2021. And as I mentioned, the new head coach, Dave Canales, fixed Baker Mayfield, and he was also responsible for helping Geno Smith turn around in Seattle along with Shane Waldron. So we know owner Dave Tepper wants a bright, young offensive mind as his head coach. Canales fits the description, and they made upgrades, right? They added Deontay Johnson from Pittsburgh. They brought in Robert on the offensive line from the Dolphins. They drafted Xavier Legette out of Ole Miss, who many people compare to former Ole Miss wide receiver and current Philadelphia Eagle wide receiver A.J. Brown. And the defense, led by Phil Snow, in my opinion, will still be decent, even with Brian Burns now on the Giants, which that's the only thing the Giants really have. Uh, so I'm not saying Carolina is going to be anywhere near a playoff team, but I don't think they're going to be dreadful this season, folks. I think they're going to be competitive. I think they're going to win 5 or 6 games. I have them at 5-12. Again, I think they'll win games. They'll be on the path to building a winner in the next few seasons, in my opinion. Which means, yes, I think the worst team in the NFL is going to be, at least in the NFC, right there with the New York Giants. The worst team in the NFC South, for sure, in my opinion, will be the New Orleans Saints. And I ask you, what is this team? Because ever since Drew Brees retired and Sean Payton went out the door and they hired Dennis Allen, who is statistically one of the worst head coaches in the history of the NFL, they've gone back to being the Inks. Derek Carr, who I always defended when he was in Oakland/Vegas because he had nothing around him and still constantly won games, he looked washed in New Orleans. Alvin Kamara did not look the same last year. And the Weeks figured out the Taysom Hill shenanigans. And listen, outside of Chris Olave, they have, in my opinion, no weapons offensively. Demario Davis, Chase Young, Cam Jordan, Marshawn Lattimore. Those are a lot of good names on the defense side of the ball. But it's not going to matter if this team is not going to be able to score points, which I don't think will be the case. I think this team is boring. I think they bottomed out. I think they're fighting with the Patriots and Giants for the number 1 overall pick. I don't know the direction. I don't like their head coach. I don't like their quarterback. I don't like their weapons. There's really nothing I like here. And Allen, in my opinion, will be the first head coach canned. And I think the Aints, if they want to re-spark the energy in this franchise and this fan base, might as well try out Spencer Rattler, who was drafted in the 5th round, and he was a projected day 2 pick if it wasn't for character issues. I mean, Rattler would at least bring some juice back to this organization. So we have gone through now the entire NFC. Let's recap here with the conference standings. So I have the Lions, Eagles, Niners, all finishing 12-5 for a three-way tie for first place. The way the tiebreakers work out with division records and conference and strength of schedule and all that, it will go Detroit number 1, Philly number 2, San Francisco number 3, with Atlanta then up the rear at 10-7 as the number 4 seed as the last division winner seed. The wild card teams look like this. The number 1 seed in the wild card will be the Chicago Bears. The number 6 seed will be the Los Angeles Rams. And the number 3 seed at 9-8 in a tie with the likes of the Dallas Cowboys, the Green Bay Packers, the Arizona Cardinals, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will go to Jaden Daniels and the number 2 overall pick, the Washington Commanders, which means, yes, technically, rookie quarterbacks, Michael Penix, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, even if Michael Penix does not play, they all will make the playoffs in the NFC this year. That creates the following matchups: 7 seed Washington at number 2 seed Philly, 6 seed Rams at number 3 seed San Francisco, and number 5 seed Chicago at number 4 seed Atlanta. Again, Dallas, Green Bay, Arizona, Tampa, they're all going to be very good. You can change up these matchups a lot. A lot of these, records are based off tiebreakers and who wins what. I think the NFC, bottom portion of it is going to be a lot harder to figure out than the AFC portion. So, again, the NFC this year sees 3 new playoff teams from a year ago. Atlanta, who replaces Tampa Bay as the division winner in the South. Chicago, who I have replacing Green Bay as a wild card in the NFC North. And Washington, who I have replacing Dallas in the NFC East. Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, they'll ride their number 2 overall pick into Philly for round 3 with the Eagles, while the Rams and Niners were new acquaintances in the Bay Area. 2 divisional games in my NFC wildcard round, followed by Chicago and Atlanta squaring off in a battle of 2024 hopefuls. In my opinion, Philly and Washington will split during the regular season. Philly's experience in pass rush as they'll just play Washington in Week 16 in D.C., a game they will lose. They will overwhelm Daniels in their first playoff game. Sean McVay, though, will get his revenge on Shanahan, and the Niners and all that drama will be an early out. They will not get back to the Super Bowl, and Caleb Williams will outduel Kirk Cousins or even Michael Penix. As Chicago, Caleb Williams goes on the road. He gets his first playoff win in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which sets up the NFC divisional round of Rams at Detroit, Chicago at Philly. So the results of the wild card gives us an NFC rematch from Week 1, with the Rams and Lions squaring off for the 3rd time in 2 years in Detroit, plus an interesting encounter with Caleb as he goes to the city of brotherly love. Unfortunately for Rams fans, Stafford again comes up short against Jared Goff, and again the Eagles defense just overwhelms Caleb Williams, who has a very successful C.J. Stroud X season, wins 1 playoff game, plays very well in playoff game number 2, but comes up short, setting up the NFC Championship game of Philadelphia at Detroit. And I think Jared Goff in a dome is too much for an Eagles defense to handle. A lot of those young corners have gotten better throughout the season. They just don't match up with the Lions. Like that clip from the Brand's World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brand's World podcast right here on YouTube.